Well, this is kind of a difficult topic to talk about, the subject of technology and how it is that we relate to technology and how it is that a Christian worldview speaks to our relationship to technology. Now, it seems like maybe it wouldn't be that difficult of a subject because the use of technology is something that we talk about all the time. This is something that we're talking about in our regular lives, in our daily lives. Technology forms our regular habits and patterns of life from day to day. But what I want to say, what I want to try to argue here, is that questions about technology run much deeper than just technology itself. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we approach something like technology or the development of any particular technology just as kind of an isolated topic and ask this question: is it right or is it wrong to use this technology? That's how we want things approached. And I think we want black and white answers to say, okay, well, if it's bad to use this kind of technology or it's bad to use it in this way, give me some guidelines. Tell me what's okay, what's not okay. What, as a Christian, can I do? Give me your list of moral duties and moral breaches, and I'll follow those. And this is something that I have been putting a lot of thought into in some work recently. So what you're going to hear is a number of thoughts that are still in process. This is a current project that I am working on and working through. And so just to throw that out there, this is something that is not fully formed totally yet, nor am I sure that it actually totally will be. But hopefully this will give you a place to start thinking through some of these issues. Well, the reason, and one of the reasons why I started thinking about this particular topic is that I am often rather appalled at how Christians behave on the internet. And I am even more troubled by the fact that when I speak to people who seem to spend all day yelling at whoever they disagree with on this or that thing on the internet, they tend to justify that rather than saying, yeah, it's probably not a good habit. And they often justify it by saying, but I'm standing up for something good, and this is right. So I'm defending a moral right, and therefore the way that I speak to somebody doesn't really matter as long as it serves a good end. So it's a kind of ends justify the means type of mentality. And I fear that that kind of mentality has really spread throughout our society as a whole. And so I have wanted to try to figure out, why is it the case that people think in this way? What has gone wrong in our thinking about ethics and who we are as human beings that has led us to this place, down this path that we are thinking in this way? And as I have thought through that, I have come to the realization that I think that there are really those two primary questions that I just mentioned that I think are most essential here, not just in dealing with technology, but in dealing with how it is that we respond to things in the world as a whole. And those are answering those two questions. One is, what is a human being? And the second of those is what is the ethical, and what does it mean to live the ethical life? If we don't have clear answers to those two questions, then we really can't talk about anything else. So I want to try to, if I don't provide a complete answer to those two questions, hopefully give you some things to think about in trying to figure out those two questions. And so, I submit that in the world of theology today, I think that the area that is most lacking is theological anthropology, meaning the question of what is a human being and what does God say about what human beings are. And I think that there is a significant lack in understanding of exactly how it is that we answer that question, even to the point that there just really aren't that many people even trying to answer those questions, I don't think, in a very serious way. Okay, so one thing that I want to say to start here, and it's hard to summarize a lot of intellectual history in a very brief period of time here. So I'm going to just kind of do a quick run over of something that I perceive that has happened in intellectual history that has led us to what I see as a problem today and how we think about the ethical. And that is the question, the relationship between morality and duty. Now, just before this, I may disagree with you just for a minute here, and then I'll explain myself. it was said that the purpose of life is not happiness. And I would actually submit that the purpose of life is happiness, but we have to define what happiness actually means and what it is. And so in a classical ethic, and by classical I'm talking about what comes from the ancient Greek philosophers that is then reiterated within early Christian and medieval and Reformation Christian sources that seems to have lost influence, especially in the last 100 years or so. There was a view of ethics which is called eudaimonism, eudaimonistic ethics, which means that ethics are driven by this question of what is the happy life. And ethics and an ethical life leads toward happiness. But the way that happiness was defined in the ancient world is pretty different than how we define it today. Because when we're talking about happiness, we're speaking about something more than just a feeling or set of feelings. When we think happiness today, you're like, in my inner self, I'm experiencing some kind of probably temporary joy for a time. Happiness in this deeper sense, though, is something more like the good life, the well-ordered life. The life that, if you look at a person's life as a whole, if you would look at that and say, that is a fulfilling life, that is a life of meaning, that's really a true sense of happiness. Now, there was a move away from looking at ethics through this lens of happiness and then the accompanying virtues that one needs to exhibit in order to have this well-ordered life, toward a way of looking at ethics that really centers on this question of moral duties. Moral duties. This is a question of what is right and what is wrong. It's a long path that leads to this, especially in German philosophy, but the most well-known figure who takes this kind of approach is Immanuel Kant. Now, you don't have to know that much about philosophy to have at least heard the name of Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant has this notion of ethics, that ethics are defined by duty, what's called deontology, a duty-centered ethic. And Kant's form of ethics takes this general principle that which is ethical is that which is always applicable at all times and in all places. So he wants to see ethics as a series of universal rules, and those rules aren't dependent upon context. So there's some good sense in this. I mean, it kind of makes sense why he does this, because he's trying to push against a kind of subjective way of viewing ethics. Because as human beings, we do have this tendency to define what's right and wrong by what benefits us. Like if we say, well, it's wrong for you to do this, and then we look at ourselves and we might do the same thing, most of the time we don't say it's also wrong for me to do it. Most of the time we say, but it's okay for me because of this context that I have, or it's okay for me to do it because of this or that. We always find ways to justify ourselves. So Kant wants to say, no, like if it's wrong, it's wrong. There's no like situation in which it's suddenly okay, because then you end up with a kind of ethical chaos. Nobody can just decide whatever they want is right or wrong. What happens with Kant and through the influence of Kant, though, is that we spend so much time just speaking about our moral life as a legalistic set of rules, right? Of just, okay, tell me what's right, tell me what's wrong, and I'll do the right thing, and I'll try to stop doing the wrong thing. And this starts to influence theology in pretty significant ways, that when we look at questions of what is God's will for my life in terms of what does God call me to do, we just think about law. We just think in this category of duty. Now, what I want to say is that the question of the ethical is something that is far deeper than that. And it's not that there isn't the question of duty or the question of law. Those are important things. But there's more to it than just that. And what I want to say is that ethics really should be much more concerned about the question of character. So what's the difference? Well, when we're talking about character, we're speaking about the nature of your dispositions, what kind of a person you are. See, it's a pretty different thing to say you do some right things versus say you have the kind of character that would exhibit itself in right actions, right? The just right actions are dealing with just the external things. just moral breaches. But when we're talking about character, we're speaking about something that is deeper and actually affects us on a day-to-day basis much more than this question of duty, at least as we might perceive it. Because when I speak about ethics, or even if I ask, like if I'm speaking to, and I've done this, I speak to groups of Christians and I ask these questions, when you think about ethics, what are the big ethical issues of today? I always get the same basic answers. People are going to talk about sexual ethics. They're going to talk about maybe war or things surrounding death. You might get the big questions of things like euthanasia or capital punishment. You're going to get these big ethical dilemmas. And this is the problem. I think that we think so often just in the big ethical dilemma, the decision that, maybe you have to make a decision, say, related to this occasionally in your life, but maybe you actually don't have to make any decision about this in your life at all. But those are the kinds of things that we think about with ethics. So I have yet to have asked that question to a group of people where somebody says social media. And I actually think that of all of the issues that we are facing today ethically, social media may be the most important one. And that's not to negate any of the other big ethical issues, but it's most important in the sense that it's actually probably the one that is affecting our own personal lives on a day-to-day basis more than those other things are. And so I don't want to say just social media, I want to say technology as a whole. And the two major elements of technology I think that we're wrestling with right now are one, social media, and the other is AI. I want to talk about both of those, and I'm hoping that in the question and answer period we can talk about more specifics there. But before we even get there, I do want to do some background about what it means to live ethically before we approach those issues. So just setting the framework here to say we should not be thinking of the ethical just in terms of our just a list of do's and don'ts. We should be thinking about ethics in terms of what is the overall ordering of our life? What kind of character do we have? And then how do we exhibit that character or form that character through our daily habits? Okay, and this is what is referred to as the process of habituation. And so this kind of ethic I'm talking about is usually referred to as virtue ethics, which says that we should look at the ethical as a series of virtues that describe our character, our inner character. And how do you develop character? Well, the virtue ethicist is going to say we do this through developing good habits. Because this thing happens when you develop habits is that things that maybe you have to think really hard about doing when you first start to do them, they eventually become a kind of second nature to you. You start to do them kind of automatically. You don't have to think about them very much. So you do this, this with children. There are all sorts of things, if you have, little kids, that you teach them to do that are things that you probably wouldn't think about in your own life because you've developed a habit. Right? You probably don't have a habit of just running around the house naked. But babies and toddlers tend to do that because it feels nice. I don't know. But you train them into the habit of wearing clothes, and you teach them that it's not really appropriate to just run around naked. So you develop the habit, and at this point you think it was very silly not to wear clothes around. That's kind of an obvious example. We do this in all sorts of ways. So the point is that the way that we develop character is by developing those habits, finding the habits that are actually good for us and form us, dedicating ourselves to those things, and then shaping our lives around that. So it shapes our character. And I want to say that especially the use of smartphones really develops very strong habits, and habits that we often do not think about much at all. So, do you ever try to just go a day without a smartphone, leave the house without a smartphone? I would urge you to do that if you haven't, and you're going to notice something. What you're going to notice is that throughout the day, when you don't have your smartphone, you're going to be touching your pocket where your phone is throughout the day. And you're going to be standing in line somewhere or waiting around, you're going to stick your hand in your pocket, and, there's no phone. There we go. So this shows us, though, that we have habituated ourselves to technology. We've grown an addiction to our smartphones. It's become second nature, that we don't even think about them. They in a way, they kind of control us. like an addiction does. So I want us to be aware of this. And so I'm trying to just at least think about these things, because I think too often we just don't even conceive of that as being necessarily a problem, and certainly not an ethical problem. Okay, so with that out of the way, then that's half of my time here. So then I want to say, how is it then that the Christian worldview does present a view of the ethical in light of that? What should guide our ethical thinking, or what things should we consider as we think about what good character is? Now, we can certainly talk about what Scripture says about character, and it has a lot to say. We see a lot in the New Testament about character, a lot about things like, I don't know, gentleness, patience, long-suffering. Often the New Testament really spends more time talking about aspects of character than it does very specific minutiae of moral demands. And I think there's a reason for that. But if there is, one thing that's kind of emphasized above all others in Christian character as you read through Scripture, as well as really the whole Christian tradition, it's love. Love is the thing that shows up over and over and over again. Love is that which we are told by Jesus is the summary of the law. He says that the whole law, all of the commands of God, can be summarized by love of God and love of neighbor. St. John, in his first epistle in the New Testament, says about love that God is love. So God is love, and we, as human beings that God has created, are called to love above all things. That is our most central calling. What that tells us is that the kind of character that God wants us to have is that which mirrors his own character. Scripture doesn't say God is a lot of things, right? So we see the attributes of God discussed throughout Scripture. So yes, God gets angry. We have language of like God being wrathful, but we're never told God is wrath. There's a reason for that. We are told that God is life and God is light. But other than those things, love is the only other thing that's identified with God in this strict way. Not only to say God has love, but he is love. In other words, there is something about the nature of this reality that we understand, this concept of love, that is closer to or better describes the character of God than anything else we have a concept of. And so, God wants us to mirror his own love in our lives. Now, the love of God is something that's also eternal, and I think this is really important. God is not just loving toward creation. Like, he didn't just begin to love when he made a creation. In fact, God is in an eternal relationship of love. Because the triune God is triune. There's a triunity of persons, three divine persons sharing one divine essence. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in Scripture, we have this language of the Father and the Son loving one another even before the incarnation. And so love is actually something eternal. Love is something essential. One might say that love is really the fundamental basis of all being, of all reality, as God himself is love, and as he creates us to mirror him in that. And so human beings are created in the divine image. Scripture uses this language. And so if God is love, and if the central command for human beings is to love, I think that pretty clearly indicates that something, at least, about this divine image in which we have been created has something to do with love. So how then do we define love? Because people talk about love a lot, but often have very different perceptions of what that means. Sometimes when we speak about love, we can mean completely different things than other times when we speak about love. So if you think, for example, about your favorite food, you probably love your favorite food in some way. You probably said, oh, I love that food, or I love that movie, or I love that song. But you may have said that word love with reference to children, if you have children, or your parents, or siblings, or a best friend, or whoever it might be. My feeling is that you probably don't mean exactly the same thing if you say, I love my child, versus saying, I love pepperoni pizza or something. I hope you mean something different. So what's the difference? Well, if you love something like a food, say, what is it that you love about the food? You love something that it gives to you, right? You don't wish for the good of the slice of pizza that you want to eat. You want to eat it. You like the taste of it. So you love it for what it gives to you. So it's essentially a self-centered love in some way. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that loving things that are for your sustenance or that taste good is bad. But it's not really love in the fullest sense of what we mean by love. It's a pleasure. But there's certainly more to love than just that. And so I want to say there's a distinction between a love of objects versus a love of subjects. So if you love food, if you love a movie, if you love a book, you're thinking of it more as an object, not a person. You love it for what it does. If you love a good book, right, you might love the information it gives you if it's a non-fictional information book, right? Or you love the feeling you get when you read about the story that you really like or the characters. But when you say you love children, if you have children, if you say, I love my children, yes, you certainly probably enjoy time you spend with them, hopefully, but you mean something much more than that. You mean that you will the good for your children. You will something that is for their benefit and their good. It's not a self-centered kind of love. It's the opposite. When we truly love other people, we recognize them as subjects instead of objects. We look at them as persons, not things. There's a Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber who I think explains this idea well in this book called I and Thou. And in this book, he essentially says there are these two different kinds of relations that we have. And this is true of people and our relations with nature or other things around us. And he says we have this I-it encounter with things in the world sometimes. And then we have this I-thou encounter. He says these are two different things. And he says, you could approach a human being and have a kind of I-it encounter where you're approaching them really for maybe information they can give you or something that they might do for you. This isn't always, a bad thing. Say if you are, going to your dentist, right, and you go up to see the, receptionist there and say, tell them, your name and you're here for the appointment. Like you're probably not having a deep personal connection at that moment. Probably not. And you never know. Maybe there is one. I don't know. But it's largely a kind of I-it encounter, as you would call it. You're getting information, right? You're delivering information. You're not really there to focus on them as a human being, as a person. But then there are these I-thou encounters. And an I-thou encounter is where you really recognize somebody's personhood and presence. And the way that Buber describes it, he's like, it's as if you ignore everything else around you and you just have this person before you. That's a real recognition of personhood. A real recognition of this is a human being. And I'm giving my attention to you. I'm giving myself to you. This is what a real encounter of love is, because love is a recognition of the other, right? A recognition of the personhood of the other. And so what I want to say is that this should form the way that we think about interactions that we have with other human beings. Because anything that fundamentally and centrally is going to treat human beings as objects rather than subjects, or is going to center the I-it encounter. Again, it's okay to have those kinds of encounters at times. But that is unloving, right? Anything that is going to center there, anything that is going to treat human beings as if they're not subjects, that is not living the good life. That is not exhibiting the virtuous life. And that says something far more fundamental about who we are as human beings and how we look at other human beings than do many of the ethical discussions or moral discussions that we seem to have often in our world today, and I think that often, unfortunately, happen in the church today. Because here's what I think one of the problems is that we tend to do ethics or think about these things in a reactive way rather than a proactive way. Some new technology, say, develops, and then we start to think, oh, wait, how do we deal with this? Is this right or is this wrong? Is this good for us? Is this society? If you start to look at now the research now that's been over 10 years with the with smartphones being as prevalent as they are, we now have lots of studies and we have lots of statistics, and we look back and say, oh, well, maybe this was actually, not a net good for humanity, especially for young people in their formative years. I think the statistics show that pretty definitively. And I think when we don't have a clear framework and way to think about ourselves and how we relate to others, it's inevitable that we're just going to do that again and again, right? A new issue comes up, a new technology comes up, and then we have no way to really evaluate it. What we need is a way of thinking about human beings and about how we interact with human beings that is going to preempt these kinds of discussions. Because a lot of the major ethical issues that we deal with, and that comes all the way from the little things that are the habits of daily life to, those big moral dilemmas, it all essentially comes down to the same principle, which is, are you treating human beings as subjects or as objects? Are you recognizing the other person? And here's another example of just a totally different, area here. Along with teaching, I'm also a pastor, and I've done a lot of premarital counseling with couples. And, you always have that one premarital counseling session where you got to talk about sex, right? They're really uncomfortable on, where they'll feel a little weird about talking about it, and you do too. If you're leading that session, you just got to jump right in and start talking about it and be the one that makes everything as uncomfortable as possible first. And then they feel a little less awkward. But when you start to talk to couples about sexual issues, which they often feel weird talking about with each other, they have questions of what's okay and what's not okay, right? What things are morally permissible in this area and what aren't. What I often see when people address those issues in the church is they have a list of these things are good and these things are bad, but they don't really have a general principle that they're working with. And what I always tell couples is, the question, if you want to do something with your spouse, the question is, are you treating that person as an object for your pleasure, or are you treating them as a beloved subject? And you are delighting in them in their personhood. Because if it doesn't do that, it's wrong. That's the important thing. So that's just an example to say that this principle really helps us address all sorts of issues that I think, unfortunately, we haven't done a great job of dealing with. So that, if we're getting to social media, so the two big ones, social media and AI, but let's talk social media here because I only have a few minutes here. How is it that you are treating human beings when you are on social media in general? If most of your interaction with other people is through the internet, and especially through a feed, are you stopping to recognize their personhood? Really? So here's the thing. When you're looking at social media, when you're looking at your phone, you're scrolling. Your brain is in information mode. It's in object mode. That's the point. You're getting information. Your brain's processing information. And so as you're scrolling, you're processing information, and you see profile pictures that might be associated with information that you're seeing. And as you look at information, you look at some information that you think is wrong and some you think is right. And with information or an idea or some words that you don't like, it's pretty easy to just be like, oh, I don't like that, or I do like that. But when your interactions with other human beings are conflated with information, because that's the way in which you interact with people, you start to see other people as objects, information. And that can be discarded. You don't feel bad when you, discard your pizza because you left it in the fridge too long. Maybe you feel bad because you wasted money on it, but you don't feel guilt for the pizza, right? But you start to throw people away like that. And I'm saying people start to throw people away like that because their brain is already in that mode when they interact with them. And I think this is a significant reason, one, why people feel like it's justified to speak about people the way that they do, but also why it's so easy to throw away friendships because of something that, or an idea they had, or something they posted on social media that you might not totally agree with, because you're not seeing them as a valued human being. You're not seeing them as a presence, as a thou. You are seeing them as an idea or an object. And so my argument about social media, and maybe this is controversial, and I know it's controversial, is that the whole thing was just a bad idea. I really do think that. I really do. I think, and so I'm not going to give you a hard and fast rule of how you use it or if you use it. And I know it's necessary in some fields, but what I want is just to get you to think about it, because I think too many of us haven't even considered it. We have considered it more recently in terms of wasting time. Okay, that's important. That is part of living the good life, right? The well-ordered life is like, you don't have that much time on this earth, so is it really good to waste it doing nothing? Probably not. But that's not the most important element of this. It's how it is that you are seeing and treating other human beings. All right, so I know I'm at a half hour here, I think, in my talk, but there's plenty more to say. So this is a little bit, just a little bit of a taste of this. There's so much more I could say, but I do want to answer your questions. So hopefully we can get into some more specifics here. I don't know how you handle the question and answer format here usually if you...
So if you had another component of the AI, I'm happy to go into that. We got some time, but I can also go to Q&A if you'd like.
Okay, I will be really quick with AI, and we can talk about more in questions and answers. I see a hand here. I see it. We'll get to it in a second. So the AI component is a little bit different than this question of subject-object. The AI component, though, is related to what it means to form character. And as I talked about, as human beings, we build habits, and the habits that we build form us. And those can be good habits or those can be bad habits. But when we do things in our lives, like getting information or learning, if we're learning things in our lives, that learning is meant to form and shape our character. Okay, so there is this connection between character and the things that we put into our head, in our brain, in our eyes, in our ears, in our hearts. And I think one of the major dangers that I see with AI in terms of its use in getting information and writing papers, or in many fields today, it's a requirement to use AI to do your work for you in some capacity. And a lot of the ethical discussions about AI talk about talk about plagiarism and those kind of things related, and that's important, right? So I don't want to say that that's unimportant. I do think that is very important. And then a lot of discussions about AI are questions about whether the information is actually accurate or not. So yeah, it's true that AI often gives you inaccurate information. But what I think maybe we fail to talk about as much as we should, at least, is that when we learn things or write things or produce art, the value is not just in the information that is presented or in the final object that was created, but the value is also in the character that was formed in the production of that thing. Right, so we teach kids to write papers. My older son's in 7th grade, and he's doing a lot more writing this year. When you get to that age, you really start to do a lot of the paper writing. His teachers now have made it so they have to write everything by hand because they don't want kids using ChatGPT. Yeah, maybe it's annoying, but supposedly, actually, they say that writing things out by hand supposedly has this stronger effect of keeping things in your brain that you're writing. So, but the reason we ask kids to learn to write papers at that age and through high school is not just because we want to make sure that we get some papers with some good information out there. You do it to form them as human beings, right? Because it's good for them. It's good for them to form their brains and form their hearts as they wrestle with issues and think about them. So this is at least one of the issues with AI, and there's so many, but one of the issues of AI here is that I think it really stops that character formation element when we're doing things like producing art or producing writing. And so it's not just about information of the final product, it's about who we are and who it forms us to be. Okay, so now I can, that's real quick overview of that, but I saw a hand here. Please.
I guess I was wondering about your perspective on if a person is in a mode where they're viewing a person or maybe multiple persons as objects, how they would move towards viewing them as subjects? I have some ideas, but I was wondering.
Okay. How do you move from viewing, say, multiple people? You said multiple people, or like
Really any context. I think it's interesting if you consider it on the one person you like with a couple. But I think in the context of social media, it often deals with seeing multiple people's objects. So kind of whatever context you want to call it.
Yeah. I think the best thing to do is to actually meet one of those people that maybe is part of a group or something that you might view in a very negative way, and actually just sit down and have a conversation with them. And I think this really does change people's perspectives when you meet somebody and are forced to interact with them who has a view that you don't like. If you're doing that, and it's not always views, right? It could be all different things. It could be, it could be a race issue, right? You don't like people of a certain race. Well, you actually get to know somebody personally, and it changes your view a lot because you start to see them as a human being. It's very easy when you don't ever interact with people to see them not as people. But when you actually are forced to confront them, like have a face-to-face conversation and multiple face-to-face conversations and learn to love those people, it's going to totally change your mindset because it's going to switch you out of one mode and into the other. I don't know. I mean, I see this. I'm a public figure because of what I do in the educational organization that I run is public. I'm on YouTube and those kind of things. And anybody who's in the public eye gets attacked. That's just part of it. It's just, you have to take that if that's what you want to do. And I've had times where people say the nastiest things to me online. And man, when I meet them in person, it is a different story. And, when I see them in person, I can always tell they feel really guilty. They didn't feel guilt before. But they see you and they're confronted with it because they're forced to deal with the fact that you're a human being. Yeah, so I think that's really the best advice I would give is like, see those people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the effect of addiction to smartphone, like you were talking about, a day, you're going to be looking for on character. Like, how is that addiction affecting character?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It affects your character especially, and not only, but here's just one example of it. When you're in the presence of other people. Like, do you notice that some people when they're with others, like pull out their phones constantly? I think everyone who has a smartphone is tempted to do it because it's just a thing that you do. I think that does change your character. It certainly changes the way that you interact with other people because you're not actually acting like you're there. And so there's another element of this, which is if you don't pay attention to someone at all because you're just looking at your phone the whole time, then you are not recognizing their presence. Right? You're ignoring it. And so I think that is character forming because it says something about how you relate to other people and how you think about other people. And then when you're in the presence of other people, you have now habituated yourself not to actually put the presence of the other person first because of your phone. Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of ways we could talk about that, but that's just one example. Okay, here, yes.
You mentioned about having kids in school, like making them like write by hand as a way to form their character. And it seems like smartphone usage is at least a character liability, shall we say?
Sure, character liability, that's fair.
So what do you think about like age limits on smartphones?
I think it's great. I don't think kids should have smartphones, at least smartphones that have access to all of the kinds of apps and things that smartphones have. But I don't think it's just an age thing. I think that we should all do that, to be honest. But yeah, so I think especially, so it has a much more significant effect, just like any element of character or habit. It's going to be much harder to break if you get into a habit at a younger age. And I think studies have pretty consistently shown, especially with depression and anxiety rates among kids with smartphones, that there's a strong correlation. Yeah.
Do you think there would be like a number for an age limit on smartphones? Like if like let's say one day the government is like, whoa, this is getting really out of hand. We gotta crack down. What do you think would be reasonable?
See, you want the black and white answer. And I don't know if I'm going to give you that. I don't know if I'm going to give you that. Yeah, I will say I leave that to the policymakers to figure out if they want to do that on a governmental level. Sorry, I'm not going to get it. I don't know. I don't know the specifics. Yeah, as I said, I worried about it for more than just kids. I'm worried about it for how it affects all of us too. I mean, I think, I don't know. I know I don't want my kids to have access to this stuff as long as they're alive. Really, honestly, but
Okay,
as long as I can control it, you know.
so it's like all this is.
Yeah.
So let's talk about AI some more.
Okay.
We hear more and more of people that are forming relationships with AI bots.
Yes.
Personal, in some cases intimate, but certainly
Yes.
I-thou relationships. So 2 questions. First of all, do you believe that's possible? And based upon the answer to that question, what is the ethic around one's relationship with an AI bot?
Yeah, I would say no, it's not possible. So I wouldn't say it's an I-thou relation, it's imitation of one. And the reason it's an imitation is because what AI algorithms do, and you see this especially with what ChatGPT 4, which now has become less personable. Now with version 5, this has been a good thing, and people are complaining about it because they've lost their AI romantic partners on followed up. No, they have. So what the chatbots are designed to do is to say things that affirm what you've said. So it's all self-driven. So the reason why people get addicted to these relations is because they're programmed to affirm exactly what you're saying and what you think. And so because of that, you're really just, I mean, it's a narcissistic relationship. Yeah. I mean, you're really just, like Narcissus staring at your own reflection, but thinking that it's something else. Yeah. Okay.
What are some clues for us to recognize within ourselves that may reveal that we are not treating or viewing others out of love?
Yeah. I think, and that's like the real question. That's like the question we need to reckon with and that's the hardest one to reckon with is, are we doing it? Because it's really easy to point to everybody else and see how they're doing it. Right? It's really easy to, and I'm guilty of this too, right? So it's very easy to, for example, get really mad when you're with somebody and they're not paying attention to you because they're looking at their phone, but then you end up probably doing the same thing sometimes, maybe with that same person. It doesn't seem like it's big of a deal. But yeah, so how do you know that within yourself that you are feeling that way? I think you just need to really examine your own thought patterns and like carefully think about these things. I would say, and this is something I recommend people do in general, though, again, I'm not the best at it or anything, and that is to spend time every day in self-reflection. So this is one of the other problems with phones is that we have lost boredom. Boredom is actually very necessary. When we are bored, often that's when they come up with actually like some of the best ideas. I know this, that like do you ever have like a really good idea when you're in the shower? Like it happens a lot because that's like sometimes the only time you don't have noise or something else distracting you. But one of the good things about not having any technology at some point is that you are forced to reckon with yourself and your own actions and behaviors in a given day. So what I tell people I think is a good thing to do is to spend time at the end of the day reflecting on your own heart. And reflect on the things that you've thought and the things that you have said. And I will say then you confess them to God and receive his forgiveness for them. But too often, I think we just assume God's forgiveness without actually thinking about why we need it in the first place. And when we do that, we need to have ways to evaluate, again, not just the obvious moral breach, but stop and reflect on your thinking patterns. Stop and reflect on your heart. Stop and reflect on how you've spoken about other people. And stop and reflect on how you've spent your time that day. And I do think if you find yourself, as you do that, getting really angry at one person or group of people, and you've taken the time to actually reflect and recognize that, then stop and try to evaluate that. Be like, is there an issue here with how I'm thinking about this person? Right? and I'm really upset with a righteous anger? Or is it, and it could be a combination of both, that I'm not really seeing them as human beings?
So given that technology has increased our access to just vast amounts of information, how can we use that in a way that's stewarding and positive and building character as opposed to breaking ourselves down?
Yeah, so obviously technology, any technology is good and bad. That's true of everything, right? So there's always good and there's always bad. And so what I don't want us to take a pessimistic view of technology to say, well, because we can abuse it and do abuse it, and it often controls us, and we become slaves to it, really, that doesn't mean that there's no good element of it. So we do need to figure out what are healthy ways of using technology. I can't give you a good comprehensive answer to everything because there are so many technologies and there are so many situations people have in life where technologies might be used for different things. What I would say is that a lot of your personal use of technology has to do with two things. One is vocation, and by vocation, I don't just mean your job. I'm using it in the way that Martin Luther uses this term when he speaks about a vocatio, which is a calling, right? So he says that everybody has these various callings in life, and your callings are all sorts of things. They could be your relationships in your families, right? You might have a calling to be, say, a father and a son and a brother and a pastor and a citizen of this country. And these are all different callings with one person. We all have various callings. And so a lot of the way that we use anything really is dependent upon whether it is beneficial or makes sense within those callings, because it won't always make the same. It always won't be the same depending on the person, depending on what it is that they are called to do, what their situation in life is. Like I said, that's true of all sorts of things. A surgeon can use technology to do all sorts of things that a random guy in his basement probably should not be doing. So the other element of it is temperament. And this is another reason why it's really hard to make hard and fast rules about character all the time, because people have distinct temperaments. We have distinct temptations, we have distinct tendencies, we have distinct tendencies to addiction, or about one thing or another. We all have areas of lack that others don't have. And so I think we do need to look at these things on a case-by-case basis. So we want rules, and we want okay, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. And I just don't think that we can do that in a universal sense. But I would say just consider those things. And I think the main thing that I want to get across here is that you should just be thinking about. Like, I want you to just take the time to evaluate it and ask the question, is this good for me? And maybe a good practice is to spend a week, do what you normally do, and during that week, keep track of what technology you've used, how much you've used it, and what you've used it for. Then at the end of that week, go back and look and go through each point there and say, was this beneficial or not? Was this beneficial or not? Was this beneficial or not? Did this hinder me from my duties here or there? Something like that. Did this help form my character, or did it just make me knack? And so in the midst of that evaluation, then I think you can make a decision about, okay, what are the habits that I could develop to form my character in a way that would be beneficial?
Strange question. It seemed like you're kind of laying out two sort of philosophical schools. One, the older one, the Greek one, about sort of character-based. And then a much more, I guess, relatively modern, kind of rules-based. And both of those feel like great potential ways for somebody to try to put limits on technology like AI and social media. And I certainly understand from the Christian perspective why the character-based one is advantageous, better. I'm wondering if you could articulate what the best counter-argument would be. Like, I understand you're coming at this from a Christian perspective, but in terms of is there a philosophical basis for a much more culturally pervasive use of technology and AI? Or is it more of just the whims of the masses? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the argument, what would be the counter argument to what I'm saying? But you're asking about counter-ethical system and also how that relates to a use of, say, technology. Yeah, I mean, so I obviously just presented in a very simplistic form 2 different ethical systems, and it's not really fair because even virtue ethics has all sorts of different forms. And what I presented when I said virtue ethics and I moved to this idea of love is really specifically a Christian form of virtue ethics. And St. Augustine develops this when he uses classical categories from Plato and Aristotle, but then he says that all virtues are actually different forms of love. So he makes love really the central element of the virtues when it's really not described as virtue at all. And so, you can make all sorts of differentiations too. It's for the sake of time being simplistic here. And even a duty-based ethic, there are all sorts of different forms of it too. Yeah, I think the benefit of like the duty-based ethic would be that it doesn't give you like, I don't know, loopholes to escape. When you're focused on absolute moral principles, it becomes maybe a little more airtight or something like that, and that would be part of that argument. There are all sorts of other ethical approaches, like you'd have, utilitarian approach, and in a utilitarian approach, you're more focused on what ends up having a good end in the whole, like what's best for the greatest number, really. Like you're thinking more, and you're thinking more so about the end of things rather than the specific actions that somebody might take. And I actually think that's probably the way that people tend to go here that do defend the way that technologies are being used today. And I don't think it's totally wrong, but that is to say that as a whole, these are going to lead to a better end for society as a whole, right? It's going to improve society. And so I think what they're doing is saying, well, we might have these little problems here, but it's worth it for the greater end. That tends to be, I think, probably the most common place where people go. Okay, so I saw 2 hands back here, please.
So I understand the Imago Dei as not only every individual is made in the image of God,
Yes.
but we as a community are
Yes.
the image of God. How do you think that social media fragments our understanding of community?
Ooh, that is a really good question, and one I could talk a long time about. That's really good. It destroys it completely.
I do think that's it.
So the way that word community is even used today is not actually talking about community. If you look at what people call a community online, it's not just online, but it started online. Now it's just popular parlance, what people mean by community. What they mean is people who have similar interests or similar ideas. And people create communities or talk about communities that are really just subreddits. Like the whatever anime people are into community. And that becomes a community. And then you talk as if you have this solidarity with these people that you don't know, that you maybe see their avatars and fake names online and have no idea who these people are. You haven't lived together. You have no love for these people. All you do is you just like the same thing. And like, that's cool, that's fine. But that doesn't make you a community. So I think our whole perception of community is wrong. Now, there are a couple really serious problems with this. One is that this perspective on community makes your community inherently self-centered. It's not natural. It's not real. It's just, I find people that like things I do, and therefore that's my community. Well, that's not your community. That's just everyone affirming you. And that's why in those communities, somebody gets like kicked out if they say or do the wrong thing and nobody cares. Because they don't matter. That's not the point. So real life community is valuable for so many reasons. And one of those is that real community challenges you because you are forced to be with and listen to and at least tolerate the presence of people that you may not like very much. Community shapes you. And if we're talking about character formation, community is the place where that happens most, is with other people. Because when you're in community, you have to work through problems. This is what's great about the church, is that the church is still this remaining community that lives on this, that's still here. And in the church, you share faith in common. Of course, there's a reason why you're all there together, but you may have very different backgrounds and lifestyles and beliefs about other things or whatever. But you're forced to actually listen to other people. And when you're corrected, that is good for you. If you're not always right, like you need to be corrected sometimes by other people. And at the very least, listen to people and their views, even if you don't end up thinking that they're right, or criticism or whatever is right. But it forces also just perseverance, because if you're forced to be in the same place as somebody else all the time and you don't like them, just still got to persevere. And just still got to work it out with them to some degree. Right? Not everybody has to be your best friend. Not to love everybody, as you are called to love everybody in one sense, but you don't have to love spending time with them or tell them everything. But you should. It's good for us to be forced to work through hard things in relationships. Yeah. So, and this problem with the breakdown of community is one that doesn't just begin with the internet. It's just something that's I think exaggerated an already existing problem. Okay, and then I said your hand here.
This is a more practical question. I'm thinking about the iDown.
Yeah.
I found that using my iPhone to read the Bible was a bad decision for me. Because the text came in, the emails came in, the Facebook popped, everything, so that relationship with God became an it relationship.
Sure.
And so I had to not do it. How do you advise on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So even if we do say our technology is good if we use it for good things, the very nature of what the smartphone is, it's a distraction device. That's the point. That's what it's supposed to do, because they want to advertise to you, and they can only do that if they get in your way and distract you. So just because something is good or could be good on your smartphone doesn't mean that's the most advantageous way to do it. This is something that I wrestled through with like my work, having my computer, and just getting I found myself, even on my computer, like I'm in the midst of writing something, and then I hear a notification on my computer. It's from Twitter. I check it, and then I'm like, and then I spend like an hour, and I'm like, what the heck? What was I just doing? You just like time just disappears. It's like a black hole. What I've actually done to deal with that issue is that I ended up buying a different device to type on, and that's basically all I use it for, so I don't have any notifications on. I actually think single-use devices is like the best thing, and it was a terrible idea to get rid of them. Like the smartphone, the appeal when the iPhone was first revealed was, it's a phone, it's a calculator, it's an iPod, couldn't see that talk from Steve Jobs, who announced it. It's all the things that the phone can do. And it sounds good to consolidate, but it actually just becomes so distracting. So I think one of the best things you can do is just separate your tasks into different things or different places. Separate what you're doing. Like if you're going to, say, play games, rather than playing a game on your phone throughout the day randomly, you're actually going to waste way more time there. It's much better to say, I'm going to dedicate time at my computer at this time to go do play this game. It's actually way less distracting and mess you up. So that's especially the case with your spiritual life, right? So I think it is really essential that you actually have dedicated time with God that is separate from everything else. And this is one of the biggest issues with this kind of technology in the way that it has affected us, is that it's made even prayer very difficult, because we just don't know how to focus without looking at something or being distracted by something else. Yeah. So again, I would just say those habits, you need to look at your life and say, okay, what would be most beneficial for me here. Set a specific time and say, I'm going to read my Bible and get a paper Bible. I'm not going to look at my phone. Yeah. And it's good to like set a timer. Really, just say like this much time. Because we also tend to do things really fast now. We've lost meditation. We don't meditate on the Word of God. I think that people also now read the Bible as information because that's how they read everything else. Yeah.
We got time for
one more question. Okay, everybody's pointing over here, so I'm sorry. Everybody else has their hand up.
So my question is, so as Christians, we inherently value other people and we value the community around us. But in a non-Christian society, how do you suggest we encourage others to reinflate the value of humanity and bring that back as something that is valuable in a culture where really taking technology away with its current role is probably not going to happen?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm certainly I don't think that all this stuff is just going to go away. Like it's just not going to happen. But what is starting to happen much more so is that people are beginning to recognize the dangers of the way that they've used it and are starting to make choices that are better for themselves. And so there is now a whole industry of minimal phones. And there are all different kinds of them. And that the fact that exists and that there is a market for it does show that there is a broad recognition on people in culture generally of why this is a problem. I would also say you can show statistically like the problems that this has caused, just in depression and anxiety especially. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, if anybody hasn't, some of you have read that, you should read it. It's so helpful. Everybody should read that book. It is very helpful. And it just provides the statistics and it provides the data and it shows what smartphones seemingly have done to young people in their development. And not just young people, but that's where it is most evident. So I think Christian or not, I think we can certainly talk about this in a broader sense. And I think when we do talk about the statistics, if you want to go there, but also, I don't know, most people, not everybody, but most people that I talk to about these issues, regardless of where they are in terms of their faith, recognize that they have a problem with technology. Like there are some people I know, they're like, no, it's great, I don't have a problem. Most people know that their relationship with technology is unhealthy. And a basic question, if somebody thinks that it's not, there's no problem at all, ask someone how they feel when they're with somebody and trying to talk to them, and then they look over and that person is not paying any attention and is scrolling on their phone. So it's hard for us to see that we have bad habits, but it's a lot easier for us to see when we've been hurt by somebody else's habits. And so I think when you go there, people are going to say, oh, yeah, I do feel that way. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great questions. Thank you.